I've seen so many people die from horribly preventable things, from doing things, like these sort of living in these medieval ways because they couldn't afford to go to the doctor to get healthcare. People trying to extract their own teeth, people trying to perform, minor surgeries on themselves, people trying to medicate themselves. It's really ugly, and it gets very glossed over by people who have health insurance, by people who have always had health insurance.
So, Brooke, I've been following your work on trutherfiction.com, and I know you used to work for Snopes, so you've been in this debunking of misinformation game a long time. What drew you to trying to, stem the tide to this quixotic quest to fight misinformation?
So many bad decisions, a whole series. No, I'm just kidding. So you can call it debugging. I mean, it's sort of debugging information, right? As well as debunking. Before I got into counter disinformation, which I didn't even call counter disinfo for the first 5 or 6 years, I thought it was fact checking, like correcting fake news. I was a reporter, a pretty standard reporter who, I covered the crime beat, mostly in Los Angeles, but in other cities as well. And then I ended up at the border, covering the U.S.-Mexico border and covering all these issues there. I kept running into a lot of issues with the border where Americans in particular just had no idea what was going on. They were, first of all, extremely suspicious and afraid of what was going on at the border. They were suspicious and afraid of people who were asking, for asylum and refuge at the border. And they also, a lot of white Americans were extremely racist about it. And I thought, God, this is really, well, it's terrible, but it's also really interesting how they all seem to have the same ideas over and over. I kept hearing the same things that were completely untrue. And so I started looking into that, and I found that there were specific narratives that had been circulated. This was before I got into debunking, because I was just curious, and I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that a lot of people believed a lot of lies, and I didn't know why. And then I saw some of those same lies online, and I didn't know why. Then I got tapped to work at Snow. Well, I didn't get.
What year was this? Just for context.
I started at the border in 2005 was when I first started getting interested in immigration policy and the border. And that was because I was in Los Angeles and I covered this massive event, this massive immigration event. And it was to counter a bill, a very racist and punitive bill that was being floated at that time in California. I think it was SB 1070, and it was going to make crossing without papers a felony. Crossing without papers in and of itself is not illegal. It is a civil violation. It is not a misdemeanor, nor is it a felony. That's one of the things that Americans don't realize. There are other factors that will make it, a misdemeanor or a felony. But if you just cross and you're in the country without papers, it's a civil violation. So this is one of the things that is twisted up and twisted around. And it's been like this, there's been this legal gray area for many, many, many years. And these legal gray areas are where the disinformation gets in. So about 2005 is when I started getting interested in this. Then I ended up getting fired a whole bunch of times from various places, which is a very common media thing. You just kind of get used to it. So one place I tried to, one place I talked back to my boss, and I had this new management came in, and I basically, can I swear on here?
Sure.
Okay.
I do all the time.
New management came in, and after about a year, I was so fed up with them that I told my boss to fuck off. And that was kind of it for that job, because once you tell your boss to fuck off, there's nothing the union can do to save you. And then the second place, the place I got fired after that from was, I went to the second place and I said, hey, how come we're not union here? And then they said, well, we've been thinking about unionizing. Would you recommend it? And I said, absolutely. You know what we should do? We should absolutely push for unionization. You're going to make more money. You're going to have more job stability. Anyway, management got wind of that pretty fast. And then I was out the door there too. And then after that, I was like, all right, well, screw this. I'm going to be freelance. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to be a maverick reporter, because this is how I was already kind of treated anyway. I'm going to be a maverick reporter down here in San Diego, which is where I'm from, and do maverick things. So I started focusing on just stuff that was interesting to me. And I'd been pushing stuff about the border for the longest time. And also I'd been looking into the far right. I've always had kind of watched the far right because of my own experiences as a kid. Here in Southern California, the neo-Nazis were a big deal in the 90s, which is when I was growing up. They targeted me for reasons that at the time I did not understand. And they told me that they would come find me and kill me if I ever told anybody. So for my own safety, I've tracked them for my entire life. And when I saw them making advances in the border regions and in Southern California after the 90s, I started bringing it up. When I saw this FBI report that came out in 2006, I brought it up to my newsrooms and I said, shouldn't we start looking at this? Like, we should start looking at the Nazis, right? Like the Nazis are doing stuff. And they're like, oh, Brooke, white supremacists aren't any problem. You're just being paranoid. I'm sure they scare you, but there's nothing to, this went on for a while. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to start covering the border, covering the white supremacist movements, or at least following them and seeing where I can go. And so I worked as a freelancer, a full-time freelancer, as a multimedia freelancer at the border. And I made less and less money every year. Like the first year it was sustainable. The second year it was I was kind of broke. The third year it was so clearly unsustainable that I thought it's time for me to start looking for work. So I looked around everywhere. Media jobs are really difficult to get. And then I saw this job listing for a debunking, fact-checking, myth-busting site called Snopes. And I was like, holy shit. I've always wanted to work there. Like, oh my God. I remember, reading the forums, all of these long nights when I couldn't sleep, I would always read these back pages. And I thought, God, I could totally do this. This would be so much fun. And if I'm hired here, then this can be used to support my work at the border. I can just work something out with them. And I did. And that was November 2015. So that lasted about 3 months before everything went absolutely batshit. And all of a sudden, everything started to come together. It was border disinformation. The white supremacists were agitating, the media, my colleagues, the ones who had told me, oh, Brooke, they were asleep at the wheel. They had no idea what was going on. Do you remember this controversy? Was a sign.
Yeah, it's a dog whistle of sorts,
yes,
isn't it?
The OK sign, in case you're listening and not watching, is the sign I'm making. And when I was growing up as a young person in the early 90s in Southern California, white Aryan resistance was targeting me. And that was the sign they used to flash to each other. And before they targeted me to try to frighten me, they tried to recruit me to become a spokesperson for them. So I knew that they used this deliberately. This was W, this was P, it was supposed to be white power. But it was supposed to be white power underneath the nose of the normies, right? Nobody knew what it meant. And that was my first exposure to dog whistles back in the 90s. So when this started happening, on the global stage, when I saw Stephen Miller do this, I was like, oh, you guys, white Aryan resistance is trying to get in the federal government. We are in so much trouble. And, well, anyway, I was right. Long story short, that was in 2015, 2016. And that was when I started to think, oh my God, all these fears I've had, these nightmares I've had all these years about Nazis in the federal government, like a government of Nazis. Oh my God, we might get this. And so then I started to see these lies. And this is when I'm working at Snopes, right? So I'm just tearing my hair out, trying to be as fair as possible to people, but also freaking out. And then it became clearer and clearer, as time went on, that we were dealing with a bunch of white supremacists, that they were in the government, that, oh my God. Anyway, I don't need to rehash that.
Well, what other proof would there be that there were white supremacists in the U.S. government? At that time,
the DHS was putting out, and I'm thinking about DHS right now because a story came out today showing that they had all the intelligence they needed about January 6th before it happened, and they didn't do anything about it. In fact, they actively pushed the young investigator. There was a 21-year-old who found all this stuff, and they basically told this investigator or this intelligence gatherer with DHS who was trying to get awareness, you don't know what you're talking about. You're too young to understand this. You're too inexperienced, and they blew this person off. And so anyway, while Trump was in office, DHS was dog whistling like crazy. They were putting out these statements we must secure the border for the future of our children. Or I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's this phrase, very famous white supremacist phrase called the 14 words. And it's, we must secure a future for ourselves and for our white children. No, it's something like we must secure anyway, it starts, we must secure the future for ourselves and our white children or something like that. But it's 14 words. So 14 is sort of the shorthand for, we must secure blah, blah, blah. So DHS put this out. They put out several press releases with similar headlines. They also put out press releases with the number 88 in them very prominently, which is another white supremacist dog whistle. H is the eighth letter of the alphabet, and 88 is HH. HH is short for Heil Hitler. I hate that I know this shit, by the way. I seriously hate that I know this, but this is the kind of stuff that you have to learn to protect yourself, if you are doing this sort of investigation. So I kept seeing this signaling and flashing and signaling, and I kept freaking out, right? Just going, oh my God. There's the far right has taken control of power, or at least some power, during the Trump administration. I should say the far right, not white supremacists per se, because the far right encompasses more than white supremacy, but it is also a pillar of white supremacist movements. The far right is a pillar of white supremacist movements, and vice versa. So I don't consider them to be very separate, but other researchers would, disagree with me very strongly. I tend to lump all of them together.
Strong Venn diagram overlap. There's a strong Venn diagram overlap.
Yes. And I'm very much, because I see them all as the same threat, I am very, very much, painting with a broad brushstroke here, but out of necessity. But you fight them all in the same way. You fight them by exposure. You fight them by pushing back on the public stage. You fight them by debunking their bullshit. And so as I'm having these realizations, like, oh my God, we started getting hit with these disinformation campaigns that played on Americans' ignorance, specifically of the U.S.-Mexico border, and which were very clearly drawn from these white supremacist fantasies that I'd read or heard over the years about, hordes and masses of people coming to the border. There's a book called The Camp of the Saints, which was Steve Bannon's favorite book, apparently. He loves this book. And I've never read the whole thing because it's just, Nazi crap. But it is basically the book is, sorry, I got distracted. My phone was buzzing and I couldn't figure out what I was sitting on that was buzzing. So The Camp of the Saints, it's this, I don't even really know if it has a plot, but there are these scenes of just utter depravity of migrants. It was written by this French racist, Jean Raspail or something. And there's this one particular scene where there's this, crowd of refugees on a beach, and it talks about their dark skin and how filthy they are and how ill they are. And the scenes become so depraved that they're eating they're eating shit. Like they're eating their own and other people's shit. It's just disgusting. They're like awful. This scene is what I believe has formed so many racist views of so much. But it's very clear that sort of imagery was informing the people who were making policy during the Trump administration around the border. And it's very clear as well that they were some people, like the Steve Bannon crowd, were trying to create these visuals, of people crushed up onto a beach in Tijuana, and eating trash and living in their filth and so on, to recreate this imaginary scene. So it's been this sort of constant series of extremely unpleasant realizations about the world around me, what's informing people who are making decisions, and what sorts of people are seeking power and what sorts of people already have it. The United States is not the only one that has had this sort of thing happen. It's been happening all over the world. We've been dealing with election interference all over the world. And the goal is to replace democracy with some kind of gross fascistic authoritarian, regime. I've been referring to it as a global far right power grab. It's a nice, neat elevator pitch way of saying it.
Well, how many weeks are we past the German coup attempt?
God.
Now that was just interrupted, and I've listened to more than enough Mike Duncan's podcast episodes on the revolutions of the world. There's always a prince. There's always, if you want to restore power and drive it rightward, first step one, find yourself a prince. Is there like a son of, is there a nephew of Napoleon kicking around? Is there like a distant relative of a czar kicking around? Is there? I forget the German prince's name that they had all lined up to lead their fascistic government.
Oh yeah,
but
there's
it's not just the United States.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's definitely global, and I know that. I think that the driver for it, why it's happening now, is climate change. But I can get to that. I just wanted to say really fast that Eric Hoffer, I cite this book constantly, The True Believer by Eric Hoffer. He wrote this in 1951, I believe. And it's sort of a very brief 150-page book. And it's just a very sparely written character sketch of the sorts of people who give up everything to join mass movements. And he is pretty clearly talking about Nazis in this writing, but he makes an effort to say it's not a political thing. It's just the sorts of people who leave to, join a new religion, or the sorts of people who leave to follow a guru, just whatever mass movements there are. And this has applied so perfectly to what we've been seeing with the far right and how people are getting radicalized, that I think that they must have tried to create algorithmic radicalization points based on the people described in this book. But one of his chapters is actually about the failed aristocracy and how they have a role in mass movements to try to either leave the shamefulness of their changed, lives behind, or to subsume themselves in something new that might restore them to power. And he writes at length about this, actually, about failed aristocrats and failed creatives and their roles in mass movements. And we've seen a lot of both of them.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted, before we move on to your connection to climate change, which I've not heard about and I'm very interested to hear about, I want to jump back to essentially the dog whistles. And the problem that I have is I see so much of on the far right of the QAnon crowd looking, encouraging people to look up the little tiny things. Oh, look, if you take the word Trump and you put it through a numerological generator, the T has got a value of 5 and the R has got a letter of 3, and you put these together and you end up with the letter 13. And if you multiply that by 4, you get the word Jesus.
It's the mark of the beast.
Or just play. Yeah. It's sort of hyper interpreting and finding patterns in an apophenic kind of way. The massive amounts of data coming out of media and coming out of a government, and then trying to find proof of their imagined conspiracies. So then, how is what you're doing different? Like, oh, look, they used the number 88. Oh, look, they made this hand sign. Oh, look, they've referenced something that was eerily similar to the 14-word credo of white power. Why are you right and why are they wrong?
Because there is an established history of these particular signs and symbols that have been used to communicate for decades, and they're pretty straightforward and out there, as opposed to this sort of you multiply it by 2 and divide it by 6, and then the mark of the beast comes along. But I do understand. I mean, the whole point of those types of garden path numbers and so on are to make people like me sound like absolute lunatics when we start talking about it, because there is a very fine line between counter disinfo and disinfo, as everybody I think is experiencing, but also to befuddle researchers who would come in and start looking for exactly these kinds of dog whistles. So I guess I try to stick with the ones that have been very established, and you can look it up yourself in an open source kind of way. There are established researchers. There are people who are part of the white supremacist movements to begin with, who have said this in their own words, that this is what they use to signal and how they recruit. And also just these far right dudes. They love freaking numbers. I don't know what it is. They just love talking numbers and having secret little codes and whatever. So I don't know. I think I just have to go in the end with, dude, trust me. But at the same time, it does help because there is an established history of and body of research into white supremacist dog whistles. And so I just try to refer to the most well-known ones where you have primary sources with them going, yeah, this is, so-and-so. Well, in this case, I wasn't able to find anybody to say that, because all I had to go on was some guy in 1992 going, oh, the normies will never know, So I had to privately freak out and publicly say there's no proof of this one way or the other. So I guess
I mean, I don't disagree that this is happening. I mean,
Oh no,
I
I
just
get it.
pulled the pin and took a 1 month hiatus minimum off of Twitter because I'm getting sick and tired of fucking Elon, retweeting insane conspiracy theories, uh, you know, promoting essentially conspiracies around vaccines and the Fauci's agenda. And then even stuff like, I'm so hypersensitive now that when I see Elon tweet out something about save the children, my first instinct is, man, you're pandering to the QAnon
He is
crowd here.
pandering to
You
the
don't give
QAnon
a
crowd.
shit about kids.
No, he is.
But how do you prove it? I feel that he is, but how do you prove it? And that's really hard.
Well, yeah, I know it is hard. That's what makes signaling and dog whistling so difficult to deal with, and why Twitter is so set up to allow for this kind of thing, and why it's so valuable to open source researchers, and also why it's so difficult. It's like a double-edged sword, Twitter in particular, because it's such a constant stream of information. But yeah, all of these are established signals. Save our children is a dog whistle. Notice they're saying save our children, not save the children. That should tell you what they mean. Especially since Musk notoriously has terrible relationships with his own children. So that's a QAnon dog whistle. And by the way, QAnon. So, okay. One of the ways that you can, that sets what I'm saying apart, I suppose, from what conspiracy theorists are saying, is that you can, again, go check for yourself. And it's all there. There are established people. There are outside sources. It's not like, oh, well, this guy who posted this thing on 4chan, 3 months ago might tell you that there's some validity to it. So there is that. But also because there's an established pattern of behavior that comes with people who are entering and disseminating these dog whistles. So, for example, the same people who are going 1488, which is the 14 words plus the Heil Hitler 88, are the same people who are saying that they're true purebloods because they haven't gotten the vaccine. They're the same people who are calling people they disagree with groomers because they've decided that so-and-so are pedophiles. I also want to make the point that a lot of this is also easy to find if you look at historical anti-Semitism, because all of this, every single last one of these things is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that has existed for at least a century, and in some cases more. Like, for example, the crypto Jew thing, which I have been, seeing all over the place, is, people who are Jewish but like pretend to be Christian, right? I always thought it was a Nazi thing, that the Nazis cooked it up, but
no,
it goes way back.
Spanish Inquisition, baby.
Yes, I just learned that. I was like, oh my God, these assholes on Twitter are like going back centuries. This is how backwards thinking these assholes are. And
I'm going to do a shout out to a podcast called Villains and Virgins, which is just about to release. It's doing the history of Ferdinand and Isabella, the monarchs who essentially sent Columbus to the New World and reconquered Spain from the Muslims, but also let loose the Spanish Inquisition. And I think next week they're going to release the Spanish Inquisition episode, and it's all about the crypto Jews. And, how they were hiding everywhere, and how it was, you pretty much had to torture the shit out of them. And, in like this multi-level marketing scheme from hell, not only are we going to take you and torture you, but you better tell us who your accomplices were. And you better come up with some names. And also we're going to take all your possessions and sell them. So it funds itself. It's not only is it the basis for QAnon now, it's also the basis, as far as I can tell, for Amway. And there goes my multi-level marketing audience. Bye-bye.
There goes your Amway advertising.
Shit, doTERRA.
Well, I mean, this is something I've been wanting to write about, but it's going to take a lot more time and resources than I currently have. There is a massive intersection of conspiracy theorists and MLMs, and a lot of the conspiracy theories even today, not just, during the Spanish Inquisition, which I'm sorry, I can't stop myself from making the Monty Python joke, which nobody expects. No. It's still the same pattern. It's still the same setup. It's just packaged slightly differently, just like QAnon. So QAnon is the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was an old satirical piece of writing that got turned into a conspiracy theory. Like all these freak shows would point it and go, look, this is what the Jews are doing. Here, they wrote it down here. And it's absolutely ridiculous. But if you look at what the protocols are, it's about a group of elites who steal babies to drink their blood. And they also are, they're also trying to take over the world and change it into their own image and steal everything from the Christians, like that kind of stuff. And it's absurd and it's ridiculous. It was completely untrue to begin with. It's been debunked time and again, and that is QAnon. It's just been modernized very slightly and A/B tested into, the vague, like white racist American subconscious. It is super depressing.
Let's explore one thing you said, which was that the rise of this right-wing conspiratorial power grab around the world is related to climate change. I did my master's in climate change. I'm a true believer.
Oh,
I mean,
awesome.
town close to me summer before that in Canada was evaporated when temperatures hit like 122 Fahrenheit, and the town just burned in a couple of hours, completely gone. That's in Canada. So, how are they connected, though? Is it the flood of refugees that are basically spreading across Europe, especially, and to some extent coming up from the south?
Yes, that's part of it. So this is something that is sort of an emerging idea. I have seen it written down by a few academics, but the most prescient person who was written about this was Christian Parenti in Tropic of Chaos. He warned about it in 2011, and I read it when it first came out for a class, and it impressed me deeply, where he mentioned that the rise of right-wing talk radio in the United States seemed to be connected to the rise in immigration and in the rise of refugees showing up at the southern border. And so much of that rise was predicated on demonizing said immigrants. And he said, he did this sort of comparative study in Tropic of Chaos, country by country, which is a book entirely about climate change and its, unexpected effects that it has on societies and cultures. And he's pointed out that every upswing in refugees is accompanied by, pushback. And he said that this is what the pushback is going to look like. It's going to look like disinformation campaigns. It's going to look like railing on immigrants and demonizing them. And the reason for that is that with climate change comes changing resources, right? You have less of one thing, you have more of another. Like, you have more heat and less water, but the resources change and become depleted. When that happens, borders, post-industrial physical borders, become that much more important because governments, particularly corrupt governments, will be trying to hang on to those resources. And some of that energy gets put into hardening borders. So climate change has the ills of climate change. If they haven't been properly prepared for and accounted for, he predicted, pretty much very obviously he was right, that would result in an upswing in authoritarianism, and authoritarianism would be inflicted on the people because corrupt governments and people trying to seize power and agitating for power in this time of great change would be running disinformation narratives as they jockeyed for more resources. So we see this everywhere. Borders are getting hardened all over the place. You see it in Europe, you see it in Canada, you see the disinformation campaigns starting to, be on the upswing in Canada as well. I mean, it's been here for forever, since the 70s. And it's not just the English speaking world either. It's, I'm seeing it in France. I'm seeing it in Mexico of all places, as their police, go after immigrants or refugees and asylum seekers at the behest of the United States. I mean, it's just appalling. So yeah, it's a resource issue. And as people lose their livelihoods and their lifestyles in other countries, they're going to come to countries that are doing okay, and they're going to knock on the door. And naturally, that authoritarianism in turning them away, the sort of dehumanization that you require to turn away asylum seekers and refugees, begins with narratives. So that's where the disinformation comes from. And so much energy and so much time since 2015 has gone into demonizing immigrants, asylum seekers, and refugees. It started with the Muslim ban, and then it was the caravans, which got me, by the way, like flagged on my passport. Now I can't go into Mexico. Well, I can go to Mexico. I just don't think I can come back. I don't know. I haven't tried since 2018. but yeah, so we've got the demonization of the caravans, which was an annual thing for years before it became this massive, bullshit fest, thanks to the Trump administration. And so that's kind of where it starts. But then there's this also, there are emerging schools of thought, and I'm not a military strategist. I'm just a bit of a hippie and a journalist who loves the world and wants it to not burn up into flames. And I also kind of like people sometimes, and I don't want them to get like killed en masse any more than they have been, I like people a lot less than I used to, I must say. I loved humanity until 2016. Now I'm like, but there's this emerging school of thought. There is not a school of thought. There is a type of attack, in hybrid warfare, which is what we are living through. Hybrid warfare, which is a type of warfare, or hybrid threats, I should say, which is a type of warfare characterized by indirect attacks. So, for example, disinformation is a hybrid threat, because if you're in the middle of if you're in the middle of a fire, for example, if your town's on fire and you're trying to get out, it's already chaotic, right? But then there's some assholes being motivated down the road because they've heard that Antifa is coming to pilfer their farm. So they're out blocking the road with guns. That's a threat multiplier. That's what comes with hybrid threats. So this emerging...
The people telling you that Antifa are coming, they're just free speech absolutists.
Yeah.
They're not doing any harm.
Yeah, that's how they gaslight you.
Free speech, absolute. That's the only way forward, Brooke.
Oh.
Anyone can say anything in any circumstances, and what kind of repressive asshole are you to not want to allow anyone to say anything at any time?
That's really interesting, because when I, as a woman who has a certain ethnic quality about her that Nazis really don't like, say things like "fuck Nazis" and "I hope fascists all die," I get a really violent response from said Nazis and fascists. And I'm just exercising my free speech. I mean, I don't know what the fucking problem is. I really enjoy doing that, by the way, because I don't think enough people do that. I don't think enough people who are like working against disinformation purveyors, I don't think enough of them exercise their free speech. I think that we need to like start telling all these people, well, not start, because I've been doing it all along, telling the authoritarians and fascists to fuck off is extremely effective. They can't take it. That's why they're fascists. If they actually were chicken shits, they wouldn't be fascists, right? Like, fascism is all about making yourself look as like alpha male as possible, jackbooted, nobody's gonna fuck with me. It's like, come on, dude, you're not fooling anybody. So more people need to tell them to fuck off. So anyway, yeah, they're not free speech absolutists. They're gigantic chicken shits. They're huge egos wrapped in little molecule thick layers of skin. If they'd seen the shit I'd seen, if they'd experienced the shit I've experienced, they would be peeing their pants and crying. I have been through so much crap at the hands of assholes just like them that would make them... Anyway, yeah, I mean, like, and that's me, by the way, exercising my free speech. So yeah, it's like, let's say that they're right. Yeah, this is just the price that we pay for free speech. It's still a hybrid threat. It's still an attack, because what you're doing is using your right to free speech to take away somebody else's rights to move freely. You are not participating in free speech that way. You are the one fucking it up if you're going out there blocking somebody's right to leave their home, with a gun in the street because you heard Antifa were starting fires, which is what we saw, by the way, in the Pacific Northwest in 2020. We saw exactly that.
Really?
Yeah, people are blocked from leaving their homes. The streets were blocked because Proud Boys went out and blocked highways in Washington State and Oregon, saying that they'd heard anti-fascists were coming. And I was just like, yeah, okay, so we're going to demonize anti-fascists. You know what that makes you guys, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that should have ended it right there when people started saying anti-fascists were bad. Because who thinks anti-fascists are bad?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the free speech thing, just to rant for a second, there's my right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins. I mean, that's pretty basic moral philosophy 101. I mean, it should be fucking taught in high school. So I can definitely harm you with my speech. Death threats are death threats just free speech? What about swatting you? What about calling the cops and saying, hey, I heard Brooke's got a whole bunch of automatic weapons and she's about to attack a daycare, and then they kick in your door. They they taser you, they shoot your dog. You end up in prison for 12 hours till that gets figured out, and then you get released. And they're like, whoops, sorry, we had this fake threat called in, but that was just them exercising their free speech.
Right.
I mean, if you're not in support of that, then you're not a free speech absolutist. And actually, I don't think very many people who just reflexively say this almost thought-terminating cliche, I'm a free speech absolutist, have really thought through what that means. Okay, so it's all right for me to threaten your daughter with killing her. It's okay for me to swat your brother. It's okay for me to, I don't know, yell fire in a crowded theater. Those things are all right, because that's just, that's unhindered, unfettered free speech. And I don't think the majority of people would actually be in favor of that if they thought about it for 5 seconds.
The thing is, and this is what these ding-dongs don't understand at all. That's not free speech, because what they're doing is using their freedom of speech to take away my freedom of speech. How is that free speech? That ceases to be free the moment it's the same thing. You're using your speech to attack mine. It's not free speech anymore. Sure, your speech remains free, but mine doesn't. So that sort of flies in the face of the free speech absolutist. If you're a free speech absolutist, then you support it for me as well as you, right? Right?
Oh, no, if I'm a free speech absolutist and there's embarrassing videos of me on Twitter, I use my ownership of Twitter to take those videos down.
Oh, yeah, fuck that guy.
There are no more videos of fucking Elon getting booed at the Dave Chappelle thing anymore on Twitter. But I thought you were a free speech absolutist, Elon. No, you are up until you get mocked. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we all know this type, and that, by the way, he should never have been allowed to do this. I can't believe that the conditions were there for one egomaniacal dipshit billionaire to take control of global fucking communication. But the fact that he did is a hybrid threat and a threat multiplier. Whether he intends it to be or not, I don't care, because that guy is very easy to manipulate. You can get him to say whatever you want. You just need to neg him a little bit or make fun of him. He'll do whatever. You see it happening every day. The whole world has got to be, every shitty person in the world has got to be like whispering in his ear right now, and then he's like, bah, 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 tweets out another picture of Pepe the Frog, and talks about like save our children. Dude grew up in fucking, apartheid South Africa. So you got to remember, like, I don't think he's smart enough to separate out the world, like that context from his perception of the world around him. I don't think he's smart. I don't think he's talented. I just think he was born into money, and you see what happens to people like that.
I think he's a genius marketer. I think he's been a genius marketer up until this point.
His family hired a good PR team.
This is also true. The net effect is, I mean, he's not a brilliant scientist. He may not end up being a brilliant businessman, but certainly I think he's a very good marketer. And the same has to be said for Trump. I mean, the amount of billions of dollars of free publicity that Trump got through Twitter and saying outrageous shit. I mean, that there wouldn't have been enough money in the United States political coffers to get him that much attention. So that's marketing.
Did you know that marketing, as we know it, was created by Edward Bernays in order to manipulate democracy? It was actually done to keep the masses in check, to keep us all distracted in the 1920s. And that sort of his ideology.
Oh, is he like a great nephew of Sigmund Freud?
Yes. Yeah, that guy.
Yeah. Like, I don't know about a descendant. I've heard of this guy a little bit, but please, you're the guest. Tell us about the Bernays guy.
I think he was just a nephew. Well, I don't know very much about his life. Okay. I just know about his work. But he was the one who said that basically democracy is messy and that the masses, this is his word, not mine, they need to be guided. They need to be nudged. They need to be told how to think and what to do. And so he used, actually, Freud I don't know if Freud told him this, but in Freud's writing, he talks about like penis envy, right? And so Bernays' first marketing thing was women have penis envy was his thing. So this is his first huge marketing success. And so he said that every woman wants a penis, and they want the not a penis per se, but just like the rights afforded to men. And he said that's how we can get women to smoke, because we can show them that by smoking they're independent. They've got this stick in their mouth, right? They've got this, and so he created this marketing campaign, which he called at the time peacetime propaganda. To show women that smoking made them more like men, and it was a penis they put in their mouth, like very Freudian. It was a huge success, huge. And people started like fashion started like I can't remember exactly how it worked, but I think they were putting out like dresses for women to match Lucky Strike cigarette butts, so you could, like color code your cigarettes to your dress. And later in life, he repented, and tried to like get people to quit smoking. So he joined like anti-smoking campaigns and tried to market that. It was much less successful, which should be a lesson in and of itself. But the thing that he did that I've written about in the past was the United Fruit Company, and how his partnership with them ended up in the 50s, ended up destroying Guatemalan democracy, because United Fruit Company had interest, in Guatemalan farmland. And oh my God, I hope I'm getting this right, because I didn't refresh myself before I went into this conversation. I think it was 1954. Anyway, United Fruit Company was putting out press releases about what was happening on the ground there with a hugely pro-American spin. And it ended up completely destroying civil society there, to the point that 50 years later, they still hadn't recovered. And that is the first example that I know of marketing being used to destroy a government. But it was absolutely not the last. If you look at that shameful history, I don't think he ever even regretted it. I think he thought it was a success. I think he was a true believer. I'm not sure. Not like, it's not like getting women to start smoking or anything like that, right? So yeah, the Chiquita banana that was used like to basically hide. I don't know if you had that marketing campaign. We had it in the United States.
Yep.
I'm Chiquita banana, and I've come to say, it was like this, sexy banana. And it was basically
this guy really did have dicks on the mind.
Yeah, that's a good point. Huh. Maybe it all was Freudian, beginning to end. I never thought about that.
That's a perfectly normal condition. About 8 to 10% of young boys have nothing but dicks on their brain. Anyhow, go on.
I mean, that's fair. So basically, that was the first time a government was destroyed because of marketing, and because of the effects of peacetime propaganda, which, well, at that point, it wasn't peacetime anymore because people were getting killed, and that mindset and that structure and these techniques got applied to society, American society. Well, they have been ever since. And now they've been superpowered by algorithms, by Facebook's marketing campaigns, by the personality data that's been stolen from us, by the data about our habits, by the things about us that we don't even really know, on a conscious level, the things that we're afraid of, what motivate us, those sorts of things. We've been leaving that sort of stuff, that detritus, all over the web for years now. All of us have. The things we like to buy, the things we look up late at night when, we don't think anybody's looking. Maybe nobody's watching us, but that data is being aggregated. It's being matched to us. It's being used against us in the service of marketing campaigns and targeted ads. Now, when this first started, I was okay with it because it was like showing me like cute outfits that I liked or like music that I liked. But then I started thinking at the same time that it was happening, which is why I was thinking it, oh shit, this is being used to radicalize people. They're being hit with sophisticated marketing techniques. And this is where Bernays comes back in, right? In order to go after democracy itself. And that is where we're at now. That's what social media has been turned to radicalize some people, to confuse others, and to push disinformation campaigns. And it's really a shame because I really believe in the power of the internet to make the world better.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how a misinformation campaign is structured. I mean, first of all, who's doing it? Who says, okay, we're going to try to, spread the crypto Jew narrative, or we're going to try and say this week's anti-vax talking point is that, the coroners have decided that all these blood clots are showing up, supposedly. Watch this video, get banned off of YouTube for being supposed disinformation. That's being picking a stupid hypothetical, YouTube. And how does that happen? Is that a top-down thing? Is that an organic thing? Is that somebody comes up with an idea, somebody comes up with a better idea, and we see which one has wings? And then how is that disseminated?
It's, I believe it's, well, first of all, it's top-down. So what happens is somebody gets this idea for a narrative, whoever it might be, puts it in the fringes, and then those same people will go into the fringes and elevate this messaging. And then it's completely inauthentic. It gives the impression of grassroots support for an idea, but it's really just always.
How do they amplify the message? Bots?
So, well, there's the algorithmic spread, there's the botnets, there's the high profile nodes who will just say whatever they're paid to say. But it's always, and I'm sorry, let me stop myself before I start going. I want to just a very small point, and I get really anal retentive about it, speaking of Freud, but it's misinformation implies a mistake. It even sounds like mistake. It implies that it's not intentional. I go with disinformation because, as I tell everybody, the D stands for deliberate. I don't know if that's really where it comes from, but that's how I remember it in my head. In this case, I'm talking about deliberate disinformation campaigns. It's being done with viral marketing methods. I mean, that's it. You've just got the same nodes. You've got the same people who are like pushing things to go viral. You've got the same thing that seizes on, the mentality of specific people. And then you have A/B testing, which is very powerful. So yeah, it's like people have one idea and then another idea, and then whatever gets the most clicks then gets put into more A/B testing, this idea versus this idea. And then they just refine and whittle the messaging down until you have stuff that makes no sense to the perhaps to the public at large, like QAnon, but which is just absolute red meat if you're already predisposed to think a certain way. Like if you're a vicious bigot and an anti-Semite, of course you're going to believe that Jews are going to, come after you. The crypto Jews are going to destroy the world. And that's how it has always been. It's always been this sort of mechanized push-pull disinformation. And this is separate from the things that are truly grassroots, that are truly viral, that are happening on their own. It's just made to mimic that. And it's the attempt, the mindset is to sort of seize the national discourse and drag it in, to the right. And it's succeeded for a while. I see it not succeeding anymore, which about fucking time.
Why? Okay, I'm glad you see it. I don't see it. What are you basing that statement on? Please give me hope. I'm looking for hope.
Okay, so first of all, I have to tell
Brooke Binowski, bearer of hope.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I do have a little streak of optimism left, though, which is awful. And I'm trying my best to just drown it in the bathtub, because honestly, it's done me no good at all. I believed so much in the power of human nature until 2016. I'm like, people are good. People are kind. People are better than you think. The world wants to hug you, not hurt you. Now I'm like, what the fuck? Who was I even back then? So just remember that. But I still have a little tiny bit of that in me somewhere, I guess. But here's why I say that. What I am seeing is it is so overt now. It's so beyond overt. There is no question about what we're dealing with. We are dealing with bad people who want bad things. They are terrible, and they are doing terrible things. There is no argument about most of these people. You can't nobody's operating in good faith here. And it's very clear. So that gives me hope, because it's like, okay, we're dealing with just complete pieces of shit. And now that we know they're pieces, they stand revealed as pieces of shit. Now we can deal with them. So that makes me hopeful, because the last 5 years have been since 2015, the last 7 years, almost 8, have been me trying to convince people to see this, to look at this before it's too late. It's like spraying saliva everywhere because I'm so, and that heavy lifting has been so frustrating and soul sucking, because when you assemble all the evidence, when you have everything there, when you have people going, yeah, we're going to overthrow the federal government, we want to dismantle the administrative state, and here's how we're going to do it, like Steve Bannon said. When you have people actually saying that, and then they're doing it, and then you say, look, he said he was going to do this, and now he's doing this, and here's the book he's citing, and here's what he wants to do next. And then people look right at it and go, nah, I don't think so. I've been tearing my hair out for years. So seeing people actually wake up to it, seeing that, for example, DHS did suppress what they knew was coming. They suppressed evidence of what their own internal investigators saw was coming. And that's, again, going back to that story about DHS ignoring warnings about January 6th as early as March 2020, I'm sorry. When that sort of stuff like when these stories come out now, it's like people are going, oh.
When Trump goes for dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes.
Yes! I was like, holy shit, at least it's all out there. I mean, let me tell you something. Psychologically, it has done a number on me. I'll little bit of backstory. I found out my family was Jewish in 2017 and I had no idea. And that's just turned into a whole thing in 2017. I'm coming to terms with this in 2017 as all this shit's happening around me. I'm like, oh, so the Nazis were right about me, that I am Jewish. We've got rising up anti-Semitism.
Too bad you didn't become a spokesperson. That would have been hilarious.
That's what they wanted. They wanted me to be their little Stephen Miller. They wanted me to be their little bootlicker so they could go, look, we've got one. We've got one of the good ones. Because to a Nazi,
really?
I look Jewish, which is something I knew all along, but I just didn't connect that my family was. It's a whole thing. They have these tests that they give you.
Well, you talk almost as fast as Ben Shapiro. So if they're looking for their
yeah, but I'm way better looking, smarter, and more interesting. So there is that. So I mean, I'm just saying, if you like Ben Shapiro, that's fine. But just know that I'm way better looking, smarter, and more interesting, and much cooler. That guy is a dork. Just saying. And also,
you're probably taller as well.
Oh, no, we're the same height. He's 5'3", right? He's a little wee man. Yeah, fuck that guy. He's a fucking, you know what? People like him are the reason people like me had no idea that we were Jewish until we were 40. Because I'll tell you what, it has been like, I had to parse through so much bullshit about what it actually meant. I had no idea. All I knew was showing up in my DNA, and then my family was like, yeah, we just... And now I'm like, oh my God, I'm like the face of these unwashed, ding-dong, unhygienic Nazis' worst fears. This fucking rules. Take that. I'm a lizard. All right. Sorry, that one's going to go up in the white supremacist forums.
Yeah, for sure.
Not just Jewish, Ukrainian Jewish. And I'm like, yes!
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I forget where I heard it, but I do believe it's true. I see them trying to, I think it was Ben Shapiro trying to split the difference between Jews, because we support Jews, but it's the crypto Jews, it's the secular Jews.
Yeah, the secular Jews.
That's really who we mean. That's the enemy now, which is, again, the parallels to the Spanish Inquisition in the late 1400s. Is so chilling. Like, you look just like us. You are pretending to be us, but you are not us.
Remember
we will
what I
torture
said about
you until you reveal.
Recruiting a Jewish spokesperson, wanting somebody with a Jewish face to speak for them, to normalize their shit. Yeah, there's a word for that. We call them capos.
So, I know we talked a little bit about before the podcast about you seeing the wellness space begin to turn into a shit show. And obviously I've sat and watched a good deal of the jiu-jitsu space turn into a shit show. And I think there's a lot of parallels. So why don't you talk about what you've seen in the wellness space?
Oh boy. Yeah. Okay. So the backstory is, I have strong wellness tendencies myself. I'm very, I love that shit. I love any kind of fringe, I'll read all about fringe diets, whatever. I don't do them. I just like reading about them. I don't know. It's weird. And I also just love the sort of mythoses, or the mythologies that people make for themselves and so on. And finally, I'm a big fitness person. I've always been very athletic. I'm a runner. I mentioned before the show that many, many years ago, I was very into CrossFit because I really liked the open source nature of it. I really liked the whole body workouts. And then I saw the shit started to come in and I was like, oh, time to go. But it's very easy, especially in the United States, I think, and not limited to, but especially here, to fall into this strange conspiratorial mindset through the wellness communities. And the reason I say specifically the United States is because there is just very little healthcare. It's a really bad situation on the ground, especially after, going into the third year of this pandemic. But before that, I mean, I'm Generation X. I grew up creative class. I come from a family of journalists and artists. And, I can't believe I didn't know we were Jewish, right? Journalists and artists and academics. We never really had much money. That meant, my social class was very similar to mine. I hung around a lot of people who didn't have a lot of money as well. I've seen so many of my friends die from stupid, preventable bullshit, infected teeth. One person had an infected hand and then she got septicemia.
Really? Died?
Yeah, died. I've seen so many people die from horribly preventable things from doing things, like these sort of living in these medieval ways because they couldn't afford to go to the doctor to get healthcare. People trying to extract their own teeth, people trying to perform, minor surgeries on themselves, people trying to medicate themselves. It's really ugly, and it gets very glossed over by people who have health insurance, by people who have always had health insurance. I mean, I never had the money to, get all these it's just, and it's been a class issue as well. So like, for example, teeth are a big class issue in the United States because that separates the people who can pay for healthcare from those who can't. And it's very visible. And that's a whole thing. But that means there is a very fertile ground for conspiracy theories to show up. There's all kinds of bullshit that people fall for because, for example, people don't know, for example, like people don't know like the right way to eat. If they don't know like proper nutrition basics, which is very common. And they don't have healthcare. So they don't know, nobody's telling them, that they have malnutrition. I think about this a lot because it's actually pretty common here. So they have like very minor like vitamin deficiencies or something like that isn't detectable, but makes them feel like shit. And then all of a sudden this wellness guru comes along and says, why don't you drink a smoothie? I'm going to market it to you. And then they drink it and they feel amazing. So now they're going to listen to anything this guru says, right? Because that guru made them feel so much better. There is so much space for that here in this country. And that is part of it. Another part of it is I think that there's a lot of, alpha male ideology floating around where it's like, you got to be this, big, strong man and you got to have muscles and raw meat and And those guys, like the young alpha male types, don't always think very critically when it comes to taking advice from people. And, there's just a lot of bad advice out there and there's no oversight, and that opens the door to so much. And people use this. I mean, I've been watching the wellness communities turn into just like Nazi shit shows for years, and it's been really, really unfortunate. At first, I didn't see what I was seeing, of course, as with everything. I just knew that a bunch of like wellness people were suddenly talking about being Pleiadians, and they were like space aliens. Have you heard the Pleiadian crap?
No, is that Scientology stuff, or is that Raelian, the French sex cult thing, or is this something different?
It's Raelian, but it's definitely connected.
Okay.
But it's like there's some of that, but there's all this. It's Nazi ufology stuff, but there's this idea that there is a very wise race of beings of light that live in the Pleiades, and they watch us, and they're very benevolent, and they are all, you can tell that they're the benevolent ones because they have long golden hair and blue eyes and very white skin. And they're fighting another race of aliens that's trying to hurt everybody in the world. And you can tell that those are bad because they have very dark hair and dark eyes, and they're short and have dark skin. And the first time I heard this, I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Wow.
Some guy.
It sounds like a Sacha Baron Cohen Borat spoof.
Yeah, it does. But you know what? I was actually just thinking about him, believe it or not, because I was thinking, that guy does counter disinfo. He's been telling us what Americans are this whole time. He's been warning us this whole time, with the Borat, like his, going out and getting people to sing about throwing Jews down a well. And you remember that where they're all like, throw the Jew down the well, like laughing. He was showing us how easy it is for people to get led into massive and mass expressions of bigotry and anti-Semitism, I think. I mean, I don't know. I could ask him, I guess. I don't know the guy. I could email the guy. Hey, Borat. But yeah, I mean, like it is like that. It's absurd. But all of these things are absurd. There's no race of people going around stealing babies. There's a bunch of real pieces of shit who've gone around separating families, desperate refugee families. But there's no like ethnicity that's going around drinking baby blood or, I don't know, whatever other absurd.
Adrenochrome.
Yeah. Oh, the adrenochrome. Right. God, or poisoning wells, or I don't know. I've been reading these insane conspiracy theories that haven't quite made it into the mainstream yet about like the best phrase I just heard was Babylonian money magic and practitioners of Babylonian money magic. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what I do.
Yeah. Look at you. Look at your place. Yeah. All your 12 pools are being cleaned today. So when people are out there and they're seeing the latest bit of disinformation, well, they see something coming and they don't know if it's disinformation or misinformation. How do they go about figuring it out? They see some claim by, Dr. John Campbell, or they see Jordan Peterson retweeting something about climate change being a hoax, or they see Elon Musk sharing some stupid fucking crazy sounding article. What I'm scared of is people saying, man, this stuff isn't true, probably not true, but both sides lie, and they just end up becoming information nihilists. Like, I don't know what's true. How am I supposed to tell? I give up. And it's again, you brought up Steve Bannon before, but his idea of flooding the end zone with shit, just putting so much crazy shit out there that people have no idea where the truth is anymore. And it's not even necessarily about convincing them. It's just about confusing them and getting them to go, screw it, I'm just going to watch, another episode of Andor. I'm not going to, try and figure this out. At the same time, when I've presented people with debunkings, either done by Snopes or other sites, they're like, oh, a Snopes investigation. That's just the mainstream media yet again. So how do people who are genuinely trying to figure out the truth on a topic go about doing it?
So that's actually a bunch of questions at once. But okay, so there's a couple things. So here's how my rule of thumb for how you can tell that you're being lied to or being led along the garden path. And it's not an exact one. It's a rule of thumb. It's necessarily not exact. All right. So if you feel a very strong emotion while you're reading something, if you're angry or you feel very strong schadenfreude or you're very fearful, then you're probably being manipulated in the service of a narrative, and that you should check your sources, go look for the same story elsewhere. It's getting less and less easy to do that because our information landscape keeps shrinking. And I'm so frustrated to see that. We're losing an average of 2 newspapers a day in the United States alone. I mean, it's just awful, but it's still possible. So you can still check your sources and check your gut, make sure that you are not acting from a place of emotion, and go from there. So that's how you can kind of like tell you're being lied to. There's a lot of enraging stuff that's going on now as well, but it's possible to present it in a way that's informative, that if people need to know about it, rather than like making them scared. So there's all that. The other thing is the flooding the zone with shit thing. That's actually a known disinformation technique known as the fire hose of falsehood model, or fire hosing. And it's a dedicated Kremlin technique. They were the ones who perfected it. And it's basically just flooding. You flood everybody emotionally. You flood them with information. You flood them with such crap, with white noise, with shit, with scrum, whatever you want to call it. Infoshum, I think, is the what the European Union calls it, infoshum. And then after a while, people tune out. They don't care anymore. They can't. They don't have the energy. They're exhausted. It's like when you overstimulate a dog or a baby or something, and they just sort of freeze. That's kind of what's happening to all of us. And you can combat that by taking steps back, by, making sure you build time into your day that's away from this flood of information, of bad news and so on. And I recommend people keep journals, which is funny because I'm really bad at it myself. But when I've been able to stick with it, it does help me. It makes me realize, okay, here's my perception of how yesterday went, but here's what I actually wrote down. My perceptions are being altered by, whatever I'm being told or whatever I've been flooded with, because so much of it is jerking your emotions one way or the other. I mean, it's impossible to get on Facebook right now for me without getting pissed off because I'm seeing something enraging. And it's definitely impossible for me to get on Twitter right now by being enraged just by, the state of everything on that site. And so that's how individuals can fight it. What needs to be done is, we need to have more working journalists. We need to have more people pushing back against this flood of shit. But of course, the same people who are flooding the zone with shit are the ones who are, helping create the situation in which journalists get laid off or they retire because of all the death threats. There's that free speech again, or, they just can't do it anymore. They have to take a leave of absence, or they get smeared and discredited. In my case, I think that they tried to go the smearing, discrediting route, which, go ahead. They can try. Like I'm the most boring freaking person on earth. So go ahead and try to find things on me. There's actually currently a campaign right now locally because the local Nazis are mad at me. They're contacting reporters and telling them that I am a trans. And to which I say, who gives a fuck? Like, okay, that's the dumbest smear campaign I've ever heard. I don't give a shit. Like, so what? Like, if I was, I would own it and, whatever. So, like, this is how, like, stuck in the past they are, right? And can you imagine, like, anybody listening to them and going, oh, well, then, gosh, she must not, she's a trans, well, I better not listen to her fact checking anymore. I mean, for God's sake, this is how ridiculous they are. But that there's all these techniques that sort of work together to become this, like, fire hose of falsehood. And unfortunately, as much as I'd like to say there's a top-down approach, I think it has to be incumbent on all of us individually to fight back against it. And it's got to be, like, internally. It has to be, we have to build time into our days to step away and to give ourselves time to decompress and to write things down and make sure that, we know inside ourselves that it's happening to us, it's being done to us. We're not losing our marbles. Easier said than done.
Okay. Easier said than done. Yeah, that's part of what I'm trying to do with Twitter for this 1 month hiatus. We'll see if this ends up becoming a permanent hiatus. I'll come back.
There might not be a Twitter in a month. The way shit's going.
Well, hopefully it gets taken over by somebody better, somebody less worse than a far right wing troll and conspiracy enabler.
Be nice.
My tolerance for the conspiracy enabling is just at an all-time low.
I get you. I'm right there with you, my friend.
That, in fact, you've made a career out of it. So how do people follow you or see the conspiracy debunking and the disinformation debunking that you're doing?
Here's the thing. This is actually part of my optimism. I got contacted by a reporter maybe about a month ago, and she said, can you give me an example of something like somebody lying in real time and, how people are falling for it on Twitter? And I was like, oh, sure. Yeah, no problem. Happens every day. So then I start looking and I realized that, like, that's not happening anymore. Somebody will say some bullshit on Twitter and then thousands of people will flock to that person and say, you're a liar. You're full of shit. Here's the truth. I'm not even necessary anymore. Like, it's great. It's finally starting to happen. I feel it's like watching an immune system sort of take over. And so that's giving me a ton of hope. Everybody, keep doing that. You're doing great. Thank you so much. Just keep telling all the liars that they're such shitbags for lying. Go after them. Tell them that their moms are ashamed of them. Make them cry. It's the only thing you can do. But if you want to follow me and watch me try to do my part, I'm on Twitter for now as Brooklyn Marie. I'm on, Truth or Fiction. I'm on Mastodon as Brooklyn Marie. I don't know how to introduce myself on Mastodon yet. So I'm just like, mastodon.lol is my server. And then Truth or Fiction is on mastodon.world. See, I'm still like trying to figure this out. But you can also find our site, trutherfiction.com. We're dealing with mostly like recycled mythologies and narratives right now that are pretty much all around Christmas, because the anti-Semitism stuff always goes nuts around Christmas because the Nick Fuenteses of the world think that it's a great time to spin a persecution complex narrative. And well, we see how that went for Fuentes and Kanye, I suppose. Or sorry, Ye.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Kanye, for misnaming you.
God. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I watched.
Now I'm going to be.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, now I'm going to be deplatformed for misnaming a shitbag.
Those assholes prove to me every single day that they completely understand the concept of dead naming. They understand the concept of changing your identity. They totally get it. They are just trying to act stupid, like they being the far right, because I'm in the forums all day long giving myself brainworms so that I can keep the world from the worst of the brainworms I'm getting. They have proven to me every single day that they completely understand that concept. And the only reason they don't do it with, for example, people who are transitioning is because they're just assholes. They want to, take away the rights of people who they consider not human. And that's, trans people, that's queer people, that's women, that's people who aren't white. Like, I mean, these people suck.
don't be too harsh on yourself. In those ideologies, women are required to make children.
No, but
so you fulfill a very important role.
No, I'm too old now. I'm old and busted, all used up and worn out. I'm sorry. I've heard. I don't believe this. I've just heard it all. And I have nothing to offer the world anymore because I'm too old for childbearing. I don't have children, and that's just it. I mean, I've heard this my whole life from these same exact assholes, and to them I say, you know. But
I'm going to cut it right there.
I do that in every interview. It's so bad. Yeah, I mean, that really is my message to all these people, because they're losing, they're going to lose, and we will outlive them. And I really look forward to that day. Hopefully it's sooner rather than later.